A mother's silent scream. The icy rain hammered against the cracked windshield as Eleanor Parker gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles pale against the leather. The weather mirrored the storm inside her heart, a mix of excitement and anxiety, as she drove toward the hospital. The rhythmic swish of the wipers offered no solace. Each mile she closed to her destination only heightened her apprehension. Her baby was coming. For months, Eleanor had dreamed of this moment, despite the challenges that had marked her journey. Alone for most of her pregnancy, she had learned to rely on her own strength, fortified by the quiet moments of feeling her baby kick and squirm. Now, at 30 years old, she was about to meet the child she had fought so hard to bring into the world. Yet, unease coiled in her stomach like a viper, an instinct she couldn't shake. Arriving at Street Vincent's General, Eleanor parked hastily and made her way through the sliding glass doors. The fluorescent lights inside were harsh and sterile, casting sharp shadows that only deepened her sense of isolation. Her breaths came shallow as the triage nurse approached, clipboard in hand. "Miss Parker." The nurse's voice was steady, but her professional demeanor couldn't mask the faint edge of worry. "Let's get you to labor and delivery." Eleanor nodded, unable to trust her voice, and followed the nurse through the labyrinth of hallways. She clutched her rounded belly, feeling a sharp contraction that momentarily stole her focus. The pain was a reminder of how fragile this moment was, a bridge between life and uncertainty. As she was wheeled into the delivery room, Eleanor's mind was flooded with memories. She thought of her ex-husband, Andrew, whose betrayal had shattered her trust in others. She thought of the anonymous sperm donor she'd chosen to start a family on her own terms, someone she hoped would help her escape the toxic cycle of manipulation. And she thought of the tiny crib at home, carefully assembled in anticipation of a future that now felt precariously out of reach. The doctor's voice broke through her thoughts. "Miss Parker, I'm Dr. Sinclair. You're in good hands. Let's do this together." Eleanor nodded weakly, her vision swimming as another contraction hit. The room bustled with activity as nurses set up monitors and prepared the delivery equipment. Dr. Sinclair leaned over her, his voice calm but firm. "You're dilating quickly. It won't be long now. Breathe with me." As Eleanor focused on her breathing, she caught the eye of Nurse Carla, a petite woman with kind eyes who gave her a reassuring smile. Carla had been a steady presence throughout her prenatal visits, and seeing her familiar face gave Eleanor a sliver of comfort. But something felt off. Even in the flurry of medical activity, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that the doctor's demeanor seemed distant. Dr. Sinclair's instructions were methodical, his movements precise, but there was a mechanical coldness in his tone that left Eleanor uneasy. He wasn't cruel, but he wasn't warm either, just clinical in a way that felt disconnected from the life-altering moment unfolding before them. When the contractions reached their peak, Eleanor bore down with everything she had, her primal screams echoing through the sterile room. She could feel her body giving way, a sensation both painful and powerful as life prepared to emerge. "You're doing great," Nurse Carla whispered, wiping Eleanor's brow. "One more push, Eleanor. Just one more." Eleanor braced herself, summoning every ounce of strength. With a guttural cry, she gave the final push, and then silence. The absence of a newborn's cry was deafening. Eleanor's chest heaved as she looked around in panic. "Where's my baby? Why isn't he crying?" Dr. Sinclair frowned, his hands working quickly over the tiny body. "The baby isn't breathing," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "Nurse Carla, bring the resuscitation kit." Time seemed to slow as Eleanor watched Dr. Sinclair and Carla work over her child. Her body was too weak to move, but her mind raced with fear. Seconds felt like hours until, finally, a faint wail pierced the silence. "It's okay," Carla said, her relief evident. She held up the small, wriggling infant, now swaddled in pink, but there was an odd look on her face that Eleanor couldn't decipher. "A little scare, but he's here." Eleanor reached out for her son, but Dr. Sinclair interjected. Let's get him to the NICU for observation first. It's routine. Eleanor protested weakly, but her body betrayed her, sinking back into the bed as exhaustion overtook her. I just want to see him. Dr. Sinclair nodded curtly. You will. Rest now, Miss Parker. We'll take good care of him. As they wheeled her baby away, Eleanor was overcome by a profound sense of unease. She wanted to believe Dr. Sinclair's reassurances, but something about the way he and Carla exchanged glances unsettled her. And then there was the momentary hesitation in Carla's voice when she declared the baby was fine. When Eleanor finally drifted into a fitful sleep, her dreams were filled with shadowy figures and muffled cries. She woke hours later in a different room, disoriented and alone. The clock on the wall showed that it was nearly midnight. No nurses, no doctors, just the cold hum of machinery and the heavy ache in her chest. She pressed the call button by her bed, her pulse quickening. A young nurse arrived, one Eleanor didn't recognize, and offered a polite smile. "Can I help you, Miss Parker?" "My baby," Eleanor croaked, her voice raw. "I want to see him. Please." The nurse's smile faltered. "I'll check with Dr. Sinclair. He's overseeing your case. Why can't I see him now?" Eleanor pressed, her voice rising despite her exhaustion. "I need to see my son. I'll be right back," the nurse said, hurrying out of the room before Eleanor could say another word. Alone once more, Eleanor felt her unease grow into full-blown panic. Something was wrong. She could feel it. And she wasn't going to rest until she knew the truth. Shadows in the night. Eleanor Parker stared at the stark white ceiling above her hospital bed, her heart pounding against the eerie stillness of the room. The air felt heavy, suffocating, as if it carried the weight of the unanswered questions swirling in her mind. The nurse's hurried exit, the hesitant words, and most of all, the absence of her son, all of it gnawed at her, feeding a growing storm of dread. Her maternal instincts screamed that something was amiss. The minutes dragged by, each second intensifying Eleanor's anxiety. She reached for her phone, desperate for some connection to the outside world, but realized it was still in her bag, which had been left untouched in the corner of her room since she arrived. Gritting her teeth against the soreness in her body, she swung her legs over the side of the bed. Her movements were sluggish, her muscles aching with the aftermath of labor, but she was determined. Eleanor shuffled to the small cabinet by her bed where her bag lay. She fumbled through it, retrieving her phone and powering it on. The screen lit up, and a flurry of missed calls and messages from her sister and her best friend popped up. Eleanor's fingers hovered over the screen as her heart clenched. They'd all been so excited, waiting for the news of her baby's arrival. What could she possibly say to them now? Before she could decide who to call, the door to her room opened quietly. Nurse Carla stepped in, her familiar face a small relief amid Eleanor's sea of doubt. "Nurse Carla," Eleanor said, her voice hoarse but firm. "Where's my son? No one will tell me anything. I need answers." Carla hesitated for a split second before stepping closer. Her kind eyes seemed weighed down by something Eleanor couldn't quite place. "He's in the NICU, Eleanor," Carla said softly. "Dr. Sinclair wanted to run a few tests to ensure he's stable." "What kind of tests?" Eleanor demanded, her grip tightening on the phone. "He was breathing when you took him. I need to see him now." Carla's gaze flickered toward the door as though she were afraid someone might overhear. "I'll try to arrange that for you, but it's late, and protocols." "To hell with protocols," Eleanor snapped, her voice breaking. "That's my child. I have the right to see him." Carla glanced around nervously before lowering her voice. "Eleanor, I'll be honest with you. Something about this isn't sitting right with me either. When Dr. Sinclair took your son to the NICU, he was more insistent than usual that no one disturb him. I haven't even seen your baby since he was taken." The blood drained from Eleanor's face. "What do you mean? He's my baby. How could you not?" She stopped, her words choked by a surge of panic. Her hands trembled as she clutched her phone. "Carla, please. Help me." Carla hesitated, a battle playing out behind her concerned eyes. Finally, she nodded. "I'll see what I can do. Stay here, and don't let anyone else know we've spoken." Eleanor watched as Carla slipped out of the room, her heart hammering in her chest. Alone once more, she felt the cold weight of fear settle deeper. Something sinister was at play. She could feel it in her bones. But what could she do? She was just a mother, isolated and vulnerable in a labyrinth of hospital bureaucracy. Unable to sit idle, Eleanor decided to act. Her phone buzzed with a new message from her sister, July. "Hey, everything okay? You haven't responded. Call me when you can." Eleanor quickly typed back, "Not okay. At the hospital. Something's wrong. Can you come?" The reply was almost instant. "On my way. Be there in 20. Relief mingled with dread as Eleanor set her phone down. At least she wouldn't be alone for long. But as the minutes ticked by, she found herself pacing the room, her mind churning. Memories of the delivery resurfaced. Dr. Sinclair's clinical detachment, the brief moment she'd seen her son's face, and the odd, almost secretive way the doctor had taken him away. None of it felt right. A sudden noise outside her door startled her. The murmur of voices, low and urgent, reached her ears. She moved closer to the door, pressing her ear against it, straining to hear. "The baby can't stay here much longer," a male voice said sharply. It was Dr. Sinclair. "What do you want me to do?" Another voice replied, softer, hesitant. "I've already covered for you once." "I need time," Dr. Sinclair interrupted. "If anyone asks, the child's condition was critical. Just keep her in the dark." Eleanor's heart raced as the footsteps receded. Her breath hitched. "Keep me in the dark." Her stomach churned as realization dawned. They were hiding something. Something about her baby. When the coast was clear, Eleanor cracked open the door and peeked out. The corridor was empty. Summoning her courage, she stepped into the hallway, her bare feet cold against the linoleum floor. Her hospital gown hung loosely around her, but she didn't care. She had one goal: finding her child. Eleanor moved stealthily, avoiding nurses and orderlies as she navigated the maze of hallways. Her memory from earlier was hazy, but she remembered the general direction Dr. Sinclair had taken her son. Her heart pounded in her ears as she approached the NICU. The large glass window revealed rows of bassinets and incubators, but her son was nowhere to be seen. "Miss Parker." A voice called behind her, making her jump. She turned to see a young security guard approaching, his expression a mix of confusion and concern. "What are you doing out here?" he asked. "You're supposed to be resting." "I'm looking for my baby," Eleanor said, her voice trembling but firm. "Where is he?" The guard hesitated, clearly unsure how to handle the situation. "Ma'am, I'm not authorized to give out that information. Please return to your room, and I'll notify the staff." "No," Eleanor snapped, her desperation bubbling over. "I'm not leaving until someone tells me where my baby is." The commotion drew the attention of a passing nurse, who hurried over. "What's going on here?" she asked, her gaze shifting between Eleanor and the guard. "She's looking for her baby," the guard explained awkwardly. The nurse's eyes softened. "Miss Parker, I understand you're upset, but this isn't the place." Before she could finish, Eleanor spotted Nurse Carla hurrying toward them. "It's okay," Carla said, stepping in. "She's with me." The guard and the nurse exchanged uncertain glances, but ultimately stepped back. Carla took Eleanor's arm, guiding her away from the NICU. "Eleanor, what are you doing?" Carla whispered urgently. "If anyone sees you like this, they'll call security." "I heard Dr. Sinclair," Eleanor said, her voice shaking. "He's hiding something." "Carla, please, I need to know the truth." Carla sighed, her expression torn. Finally, she nodded. "Come with me." Quietly. Eleanor followed Carla down a series of dimly lit corridors, her heart pounding with every step. They stopped outside a locked door marked "Authorized Personnel Only." Carla swigged her badge, and the door clicked open. Inside was a small storage room, dimly lit and cluttered with medical supplies. Carla closed the door behind them and turned to Eleanor, her expression grave. "I found something," Carla said, lowering her voice. "But you're not going to like it." "What is it?" Eleanor demanded. Carla hesitated, then pulled out a small folder from under her arm. "I accessed your baby's medical records," she admitted. "Dr. Sinclair claimed your son was still critical when he took him to the NICU, but the records don't add up. There's no indication that your son was in distress after birth." Eleanor's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I think Dr. Sinclair is lying," Carla said, her voice barely above a whisper. "And I think your son is in danger." A mother's determination. Eleanor felt her legs buckle beneath her as Carla's words sank in. She gripped the edge of a nearby shelf for support, her head spinning. The dim storage room seemed to close in around her, the faint hum of hospital machinery outside the only sound breaking the oppressive silence. "My son, in danger." Eleanor's voice cracked as she spoke, her throat tight with emotion. "Why would Dr. Sinclair lie? What could he possibly want with my baby?" Carla shook her head, her expression a mix of pity and anger. "I don't know," she admitted, her voice low and steady. "But I do know this isn't the first time something like this has happened in this hospital." "What do you mean?" Eleanor demanded, her grip on the shelf tightening. "You're saying there have been other cases?" Carla hesitated, her eyes darting toward the door as if she feared someone might overhear. Finally, she stepped closer, lowering her voice to a whisper. "About 6 months ago, there was another case. A woman delivered a healthy baby, but the next day, she was told the child had passed away due to complications. I wasn't working that shift, but I heard rumors that the baby was taken to a private facility, not the morgue." Eleanor's breath quickened. "What are you saying? That they're stealing babies?" "I can't say for sure," Carla admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "But something isn't right, Eleanor. Too many coincidences. Too many unanswered questions." The weight of Carla's words pressed down on Eleanor like a physical force. She felt a surge of anger rise within her, cutting through the haze of fear and grief. She had come to this hospital trusting the people here to take care of her and her child. Now she realized that trust had been betrayed. "Do you have proof?" Eleanor asked, her voice steadier now. "Anything I can use?" Carla hesitated before nodding. "I pulled copies of the medical records," she said, reaching into her pocket and producing a few folded papers. "They show that your son's vitals were stable when he was taken to the NICU. There's no indication of a critical condition. And there's more." Carla unfolded the papers and pointed to a section at the bottom. "This shows that a second baby was admitted to the NICU shortly after yours. Same birth date, but no details about the mother or delivery. It's almost like they're covering something up." Eleanor's heart pounded as she scanned the documents. The words blurred in her vision, but the implication was clear. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice tinged with urgency. "If my son is in danger, we can't wait. We have to act." Carla nodded, her jaw set with determination. "I've called someone I trust," she said, "a friend who works in the hospital's security team. He's discreet and has access to surveillance footage. If there's anything suspicious, he'll find it." Eleanor felt a flicker of hope. "When will he get here?" "He's on his way," Carla said, glancing at her watch. "Until then, we need to stay out of sight. If Dr. Sinclair realizes we're onto him, he might escalate things." Eleanor's mind raced as they waited, her thoughts shifting between the documents in her hands and the image of her baby's tiny face. The memory of his brief cry after birth haunted her, a sound that now seemed more like a cry for help. She clenched her fists, her resolve hardening. "I won't let them take you from me." The door to the storage room creaked open, and a tall man in a security uniform stepped inside. Carla greeted him with a nod. "Eleanor, this is Jacob. He's been with the hospital for over 10 years, and he knows the system inside and out. Jacob extended a hand, his expression serious. "I'm sorry for what you're going through, Miss Parker," he said. "Carla filled me in. I'll do whatever I can to help." "Thank you," Eleanor said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you have access to the NICU cameras?" Jacob nodded. "I do. I've already pulled some footage from last night. If what Carla says is true, we'll find something." He placed a tablet on the small counter and began typing on the screen. Eleanor and Carla leaned in as the footage played. The grainy black and white video showed the NICU, its rows of incubators bathed in soft light. Nurses moved between the bassinets, tending to the tiny patients. "There," Jacob said, pausing the video and zooming in on one corner. "That's Dr. Sinclair." Eleanor's breath hitched as she watched the doctor on the screen. He was speaking to someone, another man in scrubs whose face wasn't fully visible. They exchanged words before Dr. Sinclair handed the man a clipboard and gestured toward one of the incubators. "Can you see which baby they're talking about?" Eleanor asked, her eyes glued to the screen. Jacob adjusted the angle of the footage, zooming in further. The man in scrubs walked over to an incubator and lifted a baby into his arms. The camera captured a brief, blurry glimpse of the infant's face, a face Eleanor recognized immediately. "That's my son," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Where is he taking him?" Jacob fast-forwarded the footage, following the man as he carried the baby out of the NICU and down a corridor. The camera angles made it difficult to see where he went, but Jacob traced the path to an unmarked door on the hospital's lower level. "That door leads to the old maternity ward," Jacob said, frowning. "It's been closed for years. Why would he take a baby there?" Eleanor's stomach churned. "Can you take me there?" Jacob hesitated, glancing at Carla. "It's risky," he said. "If Dr. Sinclair finds out." "I don't care." Eleanor interrupted, her voice rising. "That's my child. I have to know what's behind that door." Jacob exchanged a look with Carla, who nodded. "She's right," Carla said. "We can't wait. Let's go." The three of them moved quickly and quietly through the hospital's corridors, their footsteps echoing in the empty hallways. Eleanor's heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of fear and determination propelling her forward. When they reached the unmarked door, Jacob swiped his badge, and the lock clicked open. The air inside was cool and heavy, carrying the faint scent of antiseptic. The room was dimly lit, its walls lined with old equipment covered in dust. But in the center of the room was something that made Eleanor's blood run cold, a makeshift crib, and inside it, a baby wrapped in a hospital blanket. Eleanor rushed forward, her hands trembling as she lifted the baby into her arms. Tears streamed down her face as she looked into the tiny, blinking eyes of her son. He was alive. "I've got you," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Mommy's here." But her relief was short-lived. A sound behind them made Eleanor turn, her heart racing. Standing in the doorway was Dr. Sinclair, his face a mask of cold fury. Confrontation in the shadows. The sight of Dr. Sinclair standing in the doorway sent a chill down Eleanor's spine. He wasn't the composed, detached professional she'd met hours earlier. Now his face was twisted in anger, his normally pristine white coat slightly rumpled as though he'd been in a rush. "What do you think you're doing, Miss Parker?" His voice was sharp, clipped, and dangerously low. He stepped into the room, his imposing figure blocking the only exit. "You shouldn't be here." Eleanor instinctively tightened her hold on her son, her heart pounding as adrenaline coursed through her veins. The baby stirred in her arms, letting out a soft whimper that broke the tense silence. "I could ask you the same thing," Eleanor shot back, her voice trembling but defiant. "What are you doing with my son? Why was he hidden here?" Dr. Sinclair's expression flickered, just for a moment, betraying a hint of unease, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a calculated calm. "Miss Parker, you're confused. Your baby was in critical condition. I moved him here to... To what? Eleanor interrupted, her voice rising. To keep him from me. To sell him. What are you doing with these babies? Behind her, Jacob and Carla exchanged tense glances. Jacob stepped forward, his tall frame bristling with quiet authority. Doctor, we've reviewed the footage from the NICU, he said evenly. You have a lot of explaining to do. Dr. Sinclair's eyes narrowed, and his jaw tightened. Footage, he repeated, his tone laced with feigned disbelief. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, I think you do, Jacob said, crossing his arms. We saw you hand this baby over to an unidentified man last night. You bypassed the morgue entirely and brought him here. This isn't protocol, and you know it. The tension in the room was palpable. Eleanor could feel the weight of her son in her arms, his small, warm body grounding her in the midst of the chaos. She took a step back, instinctively shielding him as she addressed Dr. Sinclair again. I deserve the truth, she demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and fear. Why did you lie to me? Why did you say my baby was dead? Dr. Sinclair let out a harsh laugh, the sound hollow and unsettling. You wouldn't understand, he said, his tone dripping with condescension. You think this is about you, about your child. You're just a piece of a much larger puzzle. What are you talking about? Eleanor snapped, her patience fraying. This is my son, my flesh and blood. He's not a piece of anything. Dr. Sinclair's eyes flicked toward Jacob and Carla, his expression hardening. You've overstepped, he said coldly. You think you're heroes, uncovering some grand conspiracy. You have no idea what you're meddling in. Jacob took another step forward, his hand subtly resting on the radio clipped to his belt. Doctor, we've called the authorities. They'll be here any minute. You can either cooperate now or face the consequences later. The mention of the police seemed to crack Dr. Sinclair's calm facade. His eyes darted toward the door, as though calculating his chances of escape. But then his gaze landed back on Eleanor, and his lips curled into a thin, menacing smile. You think you've won, he said, his voice low and venomous. You think getting your baby back means this is over. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Eleanor's chest tightened at his words, but she refused to let fear take hold. I don't care who I'm dealing with, she said fiercely. All I care about is my son, and no one is taking him from me again. For a moment, the room was silent except for the soft hum of the old ventilation system. Then, in a sudden, unexpected move, Dr. Sinclair lunged toward Eleanor. She gasped, instinctively stepping back, but Jacob was faster. He intercepted the doctor mid-step, his strong grip locking onto Sinclair's arm and yanking him backward. Enough, Jacob barked, his voice echoing through the room. He pinned Sinclair against the wall, his radio already crackling as he called for backup. You're done, Sinclair. You hear me? Done. Sinclair struggled against Jacob's hold, but it was futile. The sound of approaching footsteps in the hallway signaled the arrival of reinforcements, and moments later, 2 uniformed police officers entered the room, weapons drawn. Hands where we can see them, one of the officers ordered. Jacob stepped back, allowing the officers to take control. Sinclair glared at Eleanor as he was handcuffed, his eyes burning with hatred. This isn't over, he spat as they led him away. Eleanor let out a shaky breath, her knees threatening to give way. Carla was at her side in an instant, steadying her with a gentle hand on her shoulder. It's okay, Eleanor, Carla said softly. You're safe now. But Eleanor wasn't so sure. As she looked down at her son, his tiny face peaceful and unaware of the danger they'd just escaped, she felt a lingering unease. Dr. Sinclair's words echoed in her mind. This isn't over. Hours later, Eleanor sat in a quiet room at the hospital, holding her son close. Jacob and Carla had stayed with her, their presence a small comfort as she processed everything that had happened. The police had assured her that an investigation was underway, but the details remained murky. How many other families had been affected? How deep did this conspiracy go? Eleanor kissed her son's forehead, her resolve hardening. She didn't have all the answers yet, but one thing was certain. She wouldn't rest until the truth was fully uncovered. For her son, and for all the other families who deserved justice. Unraveling the web. Eleanor sat in the hospital's private waiting room, her son cradled in her arms. The weight of him against her chest was both comforting and sobering, a reminder of how close she'd come to losing him forever. The events of the past 24 hours felt surreal, like a nightmare she couldn't wake from. Yet the warm, rhythmic breath of her child grounded her in the harsh reality. The room was quiet, save for the soft murmurs of conversation between Nurse Carla and Jacob, who were seated nearby. They had been her lifelines through the chaos, and now, as the hospital buzzed with police activity, their presence was her only anchor. Eleanor's mind raced with questions that refused to settle. Why her? Why her son? How many other families had fallen victim to this nightmare? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. A detective stepped in, his weathered face reflecting years of experience. His badge read Detective Marcus Harlow. He carried a small notebook and a stern expression that softened slightly as his eyes met Eleanor's. "Miss Parker," he said, his voice steady but tinged with empathy. "I'm Detective Harlow. I'm leading the investigation into what happened here. I'd like to ask you a few questions, if you're feeling up to it." Eleanor nodded, adjusting her grip on her son. "I'll do whatever it takes to help," she said firmly. "But first, I need to know, is my son safe now?" Harlow pulled up a chair, his posture relaxed but attentive. "Your son is safe," he assured her. "Dr. Sinclair has been taken into custody, and we're combing through hospital records and surveillance footage to piece together what he's been involved in. We'll also be conducting a full audit of the NICU and maternity wards to ensure no other infants are at risk." Eleanor exhaled, the tension in her chest easing slightly. "Thank you," she said softly. "But I need to understand. Why? Why would anyone do this?" Harlow hesitated, his gaze dropping to his notebook. "We're still investigating, but from what we've uncovered so far, it appears Dr. Sinclair was part of a larger network. He wasn't just a rogue doctor acting alone." "What kind of network?" Jacob asked, his arms crossed as he leaned against the wall. "Human trafficking." Harlow nodded grimly. "It's a possibility. We've seen cases like this before. Wealthy clients looking to adopt children illegally, bypassing the legal system entirely. These networks target vulnerable families, often fabricating deaths or convincing parents their babies were stillborn. It's a sick, calculated operation." Eleanor felt her stomach churn. The idea that someone could profit from such a heinous act was almost too much to bear. How could this happen in a hospital? She demanded, her voice shaking with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "A place that's supposed to protect lives." "It's not as uncommon as you'd think," Harlow said, his tone heavy. "All it takes is one person in a position of authority to exploit the system. Dr. Sinclair's credentials and reputation likely shielded him from suspicion, but people like Nurse Carla." He glanced at her with a nod of respect. "Are the reason we catch these criminals. Whistleblowers make all the difference." Carla flushed slightly, her gaze dropping to her hands. "I just did what anyone would have done," she said modestly. "No," Eleanor said firmly, her eyes meeting Carla's. "You did what most people wouldn't. You stood up for what was right, even when it was dangerous. You saved my son." Carla gave her a small, grateful smile, but the weight of the moment was palpable. Harlow cleared his throat, drawing their attention back to him. "Miss Parker, I'd like to go over some of the specifics with you. Anything you can remember about your interactions with Dr. Sinclair or anyone else involved could be helpful." Eleanor nodded, recounting every detail she could recall, from the delivery room to the NICU, the morgue, and the confrontation in the old maternity ward. Harlow listened intently, taking meticulous notes. When she finished, he closed his notebook and looked at her with a thoughtful expression. "There's one detail that stands out," he said. "You mentioned hearing Dr. Sinclair say, 'This isn't over.' Do you have any idea what he might have meant by that? Eleanor shook her head, her grip tightening on her son. I don't know, she admitted, but it sounded like a threat. It might have been, Harlow said, or it might have been a warning. Either way, we're not taking any chances. We'll have officers stationed outside your apartment, and we'll keep you updated as the investigation unfolds. Eleanor nodded, though the thought of returning home filled her with unease. How could she ever feel safe again, knowing what had almost happened? As Harlow stood to leave, Jacob stepped forward. Detective, what about the man Dr. Sinclair handed the baby to? Do we have an ID on him? We're working on it, Harlow said. The footage doesn't give us a clear view of his face, but we're cross-referencing it with staff records and visitor logs. If he's part of the network, we'll find him. Jacob nodded, his jaw set. Good. After Harlow left, the room fell into a heavy silence. Eleanor looked down at her son, his tiny fingers curling against her chest, and felt a surge of resolve. This can't happen to anyone else, she said, her voice quiet but firm. I won't let it. Carla placed a comforting hand on Eleanor's shoulder. You've been through so much already, she said gently. Take some time to rest. We'll figure this out together. Eleanor nodded, but she knew rest wouldn't come easily. There was too much at stake, too many unanswered questions, and too many lives that could still be in danger. That evening, Eleanor sat in a temporary safe house provided by the police, her son sleeping soundly in a bassinet beside her. She stared out the window at the city lights, her thoughts racing. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Dr. Sinclair's face, heard his chilling words, "This isn't over." She reached for her phone, scrolling through her messages until she found one from her sister, July. Call me when you can. I'm here for you. Eleanor dialed the number, and July picked up almost immediately. Eleanor, she said, her voice filled with concern. Are you okay? What's going on? Eleanor hesitated, tears welling in her eyes as she struggled to find the words. It's a long story, she said finally, but I need your help. July didn't hesitate. Anything. Just tell me what you need. I need to know everything about Dr. Sinclair, Eleanor said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. And I need to make sure no one else goes through what I did. Unveiling hidden connections. Eleanor ended the call with Julie, her mind alight with determination. She had always admired her sister's tenacity and investigative skills, but now she was counting on them. If anyone could help her untangle the web surrounding Dr. Sinclair, it was July. Setting her phone down, Eleanor glanced at her son, who lay peacefully in the bassinet. His tiny chest rose and fell with each soft breath, a reminder of why she couldn't give in to fear. She reached out and lightly brushed her fingers over his delicate hand, her resolve hardening. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about ensuring no other parent faced the same nightmare. The first thread. The next morning, Julie called back, her voice crackling with urgency. Eleanor, you're not going to believe this. I've been digging into Dr. Sinclair's background, and there are some major red flags. Eleanor sat up straighter, cradling the phone between her ear and shoulder. What did you find? For starters, he's been involved in 2 malpractice lawsuits in the past 5 years, Julie explained. Both cases involved complications during delivery, and in both instances, the families alleged that their babies were stillborn under suspicious circumstances. The cases were settled out of court, but the details are sealed. Eleanor's stomach churned. So this isn't the first time. No, it's not, Julie confirmed. But it gets stranger. Before working at Street Vincent's, Sinclair was on staff at a private clinic that shut down abruptly. The clinic's records were seized during a federal investigation, but there's almost no public information about why. Eleanor's heart pounded. What do you think it means? July hesitated. I think it means he's part of something bigger, she said carefully. And I think that clinic was involved. If the feds got involved, there's a chance they uncovered something substantial. Eleanor's thoughts raced. If Dr. Sinclair had a history of suspicious behavior, why was he still practicing? And why hadn't the hospital caught on? "Can you find out more about that clinic?" she asked. "I'll try," Julie said. "But Eleanor, you need to be careful. If Sinclair is part of a network, they won't take kindly to someone digging around." "I don't care," Eleanor said firmly. "They already tried to take my son. I won't stop until the truth comes out." Back to the hospital. Later that day, Eleanor returned to Street Vincent's under the protection of Detective Harlow's team. The police presence was palpable, with uniformed officers stationed throughout the hospital. The sight was both reassuring and unsettling, a stark reminder of how close she had come to losing everything. Eleanor met with Harlow in a secured office. The detective wasted no time getting to the point. "We've reviewed additional footage and interviewed some of the staff," he began, his tone serious. "We're piecing together a clearer picture of Sinclair's activities, but there's still a lot we don't know." "What have you found?" Eleanor asked, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Harlow leaned forward, his expression grim. "It appears Sinclair was working with at least one accomplice, a man who frequently entered the hospital through a service entrance late at night. We believe this man is responsible for transporting the babies out of the facility." Eleanor's breath caught. "How many babies?" "We don't have an exact number yet," Harlow admitted. "But based on the records we've recovered, we suspect there may be multiple victims." The room fell silent as the weight of his words sank in. Eleanor's mind reeled, imagining the parents who had been told their children were gone, only to have them stolen away. The thought was almost too much to bear. "What about my son?" Eleanor asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Was he part of their plan?" Harlow nodded grimly. "Yes. From what we've uncovered, Sinclair targeted your case specifically. He knew you were a single mother with limited family support, which made you a prime target. They assumed you wouldn't question the official story." Eleanor's stomach twisted with anger. "But why? Why go through all this trouble?" Harlow hesitated, then leaned back in his chair. "We believe Sinclair was selling the babies to high-paying clients, couples who wanted children but were unwilling or unable to go through legal adoption channels. It's a lucrative market, and Sinclair had access to the perfect cover." The words hit Eleanor like a physical blow. The thought of her son being sold like a commodity made her blood boil. "How do we stop them?" she asked, her voice shaking with determination. "How do we make sure they never do this to anyone else?" "We're working on it," Harlow assured her. "But it's going to take time. This network is well organized, and Sinclair is just one piece of the puzzle. He won't talk, but we're confident we'll find others who will." A hidden ally. As Eleanor left the meeting, she felt both relieved and overwhelmed. The truth was finally coming to light, but the fight was far from over. She returned to the waiting room, where Carla and Jacob were waiting for her. "How did it go?" Carla asked, her expression filled with concern. "They think Sinclair was part of a trafficking network," Eleanor said quietly. "They're still investigating, but they're getting closer." Carla nodded, her jaw tightening. "I'm glad they're taking it seriously. You deserve answers." Eleanor hesitated, then looked at Carla. "You've been by my side through all of this," she said. "Why? You didn't have to get involved." Carla smiled faintly, her eyes glistening with emotion. "Because it's the right thing to do," she said simply. "And because I've seen too many families torn apart by this kind of evil. If I can help stop it, I will." Eleanor reached out and squeezed Carla's hand, her gratitude too deep for words. That night, as Eleanor held her son close in the safety of the safe house, she felt the beginnings of hope. The road ahead was uncertain, but she wasn't alone. With allies like Carla, Jacob, July, and Detective Harlow, she knew they had a fighting chance to uncover the full extent of Sinclair's crimes. For now, though, she allowed herself a moment of peace, her son's soft breaths lulling her into a restless but determined sleep. Justice and redemption. Eleanor awoke to the soft cooing of her son in the early morning light. The sterile walls of the safe house still felt foreign, but the warm weight of her child in her arms gave her strength. She hadn't slept much, her dreams haunted by the faces of other mothers who might have unknowingly lost their children to the same heinous scheme. Today, she resolved, would bring her closer to justice. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was Julie. Eleanor picked up quickly, her heart skipping a beat. "Did you find anything?" she asked, her voice tinged with hope and urgency. Julie didn't waste time. "I got into some old public records," she said. "That private clinic where Dr. Sinclair worked. It was shut down for suspected involvement in illegal adoptions. The investigation stalled because the key players vanished, including Sinclair." Eleanor's stomach churned. How was he allowed to work here after that? His medical license was never officially revoked, Julie explained. He claimed he was unaware of the illegal activities at the clinic, and there wasn't enough evidence to prove otherwise. But get this, several babies from that clinic were never accounted for. Their records just disappeared. Eleanor's grip tightened on her phone. He's been doing this for years. Julie hesitated before responding. "There's more. I cross-referenced the clinic's financials with recent transactions tied to Sinclair. He's been receiving large sums of money from offshore accounts connected to private adoption agencies in Eastern Europe." Eleanor felt a cold rage settle over her. "So this isn't just a local operation. It's global." "Exactly," Julie confirmed. "And I don't think Sinclair was working alone. Someone higher up is orchestrating this." Eleanor's mind raced. The network was bigger than she'd imagined, but knowing its scale only strengthened her resolve. "We have to stop them," she said, her voice firm. "This can't go on." The sting operation. That afternoon, Eleanor met with Detective Harlow and his team to discuss their next steps. The evidence Julie uncovered had been forwarded to the authorities, adding a crucial layer to their case. Now they needed a way to lure the other players out of the shadows. "We're setting up a sting," Harlow explained, spreading a series of photographs and documents across the table. "Sinclair's offshore accounts give us a trail to follow, but we need bait. Something, or someone, that will draw his contacts out." Eleanor frowned, scanning the documents. "How do you plan to do that?" Harlow's gaze settled on her, his expression serious. "With your help." Eleanor froze, her heart pounding. "What do you mean?" "Sinclair's accomplices don't know he's been arrested yet," Harlow said. "We intercepted a message he received from one of them, an encrypted email asking if the package is ready. We believe they're referring to your son." The room fell silent, the weight of his words pressing down on everyone present. Eleanor's grip on the table tightened. "You want me to pretend my son is still part of their plan?" she asked, her voice shaking. "It's a risk," Harlow admitted, "but it might be our only chance to identify the buyers and bring them down. We'll have undercover agents with you every step of the way, and your son will be safe." Eleanor looked at her sleeping child in the carrier beside her. The thought of using him as bait made her stomach turn, but she knew this wasn't just about her anymore. If they didn't stop this network now, countless other families would suffer. "I'll do it," she said finally, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. "But only if you promise me he'll be safe." "You have my word," Harlow said. "We'll make sure nothing happens to him, or to you." Setting the trap. Over the next 48 hours, the team worked tirelessly to prepare for the operation. Eleanor was fitted with a discreet microphone and given detailed instructions on how to interact with the suspects. Carla and Jacob stayed by her side, offering support and encouragement. On the evening of the sting, Eleanor arrived at the designated meeting spot, a private warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The space was dimly lit, its towering shelves filled with abandoned crates and equipment. Eleanor's heart raced as she clutched her son close, her every instinct screaming at her to turn and run. But she stood her ground, her resolve unshaken. Through the hidden earpiece, Harlow's voice crackled. "Stay calm, Eleanor. We've got eyes on you." The warehouse door creaked open, and two men entered. One was the man from the NICU footage, his face now visible under the harsh light. The other was a tall, thin man with sharp features and an air of authority. "You must be Eleanor," the taller man said, his voice smooth but cold. "I believe you have something for us." Eleanor swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "I want to see the money first," she said, her voice steady. The man smirked. "Smart girl." He nodded to his accomplice, who pulled out a briefcase and opened it, revealing neatly stacked bundles of cash. As agreed. Eleanor hesitated, glancing down at her son. "Why him?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why my child?" The man's smile faded, replaced by a look of mild irritation. "Do you really want the answer, or are you just stalling?" "I deserve to know," Eleanor said, her tone firm. "If I'm giving him up, I need to understand why." The man sighed, as if humoring her. "Fine. Your son fits the profile. Healthy, strong, and born to a single mother with limited resources. The perfect candidate for a rehoming. Now, shall we proceed?" Eleanor felt a surge of anger, but forced herself to remain composed. She nodded, shifting her son in her arms as if preparing to hand him over. "Now," Harlow's voice barked in her earpiece. The warehouse erupted into chaos as police officers stormed in, their weapons drawn. The two men barely had time to react before they were tackled to the ground and handcuffed. Eleanor stepped back, clutching her son tightly as tears streamed down her face. "It's over," Harlow said, appearing at her side. "You did it, Eleanor." A new beginning. In the weeks that followed, the sting operation led to the dismantling of a sprawling trafficking network that spanned multiple countries. Dozens of families were reunited with their children, and Eleanor became a symbol of hope and resilience for parents everywhere. Though the scars of her ordeal would remain, Eleanor found solace in the knowledge that her fight had made a difference. She dedicated herself to advocacy, working with law enforcement and support groups to ensure no other family would endure the same nightmare. One evening, as she rocked her son to sleep, Eleanor gazed at his peaceful face and whispered, "You're safe now, my love. And I promise, I'll always protect you." Her journey had been harrowing, but it had also shown her the depths of her strength and the power of a mother's love. And as she held her child close, she knew they would face the future together, unshaken and unstoppable.